Hi, I'm Georgina. I'm an ambassador for Faber-Castell Australia, and I also work in residential architecture and as an illustrator and painter. Today I'm going to show you how to apply some of Faber-Castell's most beautiful archival products onto canvas, ready to hang in your home. I also want to share a method I like using to generate a colour palette so that the artwork is tailored for your own space and your own preferences. Much of our time creating is going to rely on the rich pigments of these beautiful products and also the solvents that we'll be using to mix them. So I really hope that you enjoy leaning into the fluidity of this kind of practice. I think that spontaneity and improvisation are so enjoyable, and they can result in the most beautiful and unexpected of artworks.
What you will need. The primary supply we'll use in this demonstration are Faber-Castell's Albrecht Durer Watercolour Markers. These are highly pigmented, dual-ended markers with both a brush and a fine tip. Note, these aren't standard ink-filled markers, but rather they contain a liquid watercolour pigment. We'll also use Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils, which are Faber-Castell's classic artist-quality water-soluble pencil. A clear primed linen or white canvas, in whatever size or shape fits your space. I'm using a mid-range 30 by 40 inch linen canvas, just picked up from my local art store. Paintbrushes. I have a mix of small detail to large area brushes, mostly cut in filbert, pointed and flat ends. I'm also using a mix of high quality and dollar store brands, just to show what can be achieved at any level. If you're beginning at ground zero and not sure what to use, I recommend starting with a large synthetic flat brush and a few medium-sized brushes, so generally sized 4 to 6, but numbering conventions do vary from brand to brand. I find filbert, flat and pointed shapes comfortable for the way I paint, but it's essential that you find out what works for you. We'll also need masking tape, measuring tape, coarse sea salt, water, isopropyl alcohol or diluted methylated spirits, and to finish, a gloss varnish spray. Optional extra is gold or silver leaf to embellish the artwork at the end, and an adhesive or binder medium. This one isn't crucial, but depending on the artwork, it can be an element that adds dimension and ties things together. And of course, it's beautiful. This tutorial is a demonstration of techniques you can apply to whatever design you can think of. I created a series of free line work reference images that can act as a starting point for your piece. Feel free to download and use any of them. The link will be in the video description or the page you're viewing this tutorial. And if you share your finished work online, don't forget to tag Faber-Castell Australia and hashtag Colour for Life. Generating your colour palette. There are many formulas out there for generating a colour palette. This method is one of my favourites as it's a fail-safe to create something uniquely yours, yet it still stands with some fundamental elements of colour theory. First step is to choose a warm neutral. Browns, beiges, muted earth tones. You can take cues directly from the colours in your own home for this, like the timber colours of your furniture or floors, from fabrics, stone, bricks or tiles. This will instantly allow the painting to find a home amongst your interiors. Next, you want a cool tone that complements your warm neutral. The cool will ultimately depend on your first neutral, so test them. And last, you want one bright, contrasting accent colour. This should be a colour that makes your heart sing. It will be used as sparingly but effectively as you wish in your artwork, and it will create a point of difference and a surprise. This formula has been applied for many statement artworks for homes, so if it meshes with your own sense of style, I'm excited for you to find out how it can work for you. For this tutorial, I've picked dark sepia, ultramarine as a contrasting blue, and pink carmine as the feature. I'm also keeping some similar tones adjacent to these colours handy for some added visual complexity. If you're in need of some ideas, combinations that work well are warm grey with olive green and scarlet, sandstone with navy and lilac, beige with sapphire and orange, and burgundy with teal and pink. To start, I'm using masking tape and a tape measure just to outline where we're going to be painting. This is the design I'll be referring to, but of course you can use any of them in the PDF downloadable from the Faber-Castell Australia site, or create one of your own. I quite like this design because it's so simple, and it can either read as an abstract or a landscape. I want you to remember that perfection is not the goal. Rather, it's about leaning into your own intuition, the colours that resonate with you, and the inherent nature of the materials we have on hand. I did spend a bit of time shifting the masking tape to get the borders exactly where I feel work on this canvas. I'm just using a colour palette to outline the circle and being really quick and simple in this early mock-up phase. And of course, you can just pause this video anytime you need more time or space to create. Here I'm quickly mapping where I expect those colours are going to go, but of course always keeping an open mind, as the approach can always evolve as you work. Using my dark sepia marker, I'm directly applying the colour to the dry canvas using the brush end. This is a great opportunity to get a feel for how the markers work and disperse the pigment over the surface. You don't need to be precise here, because all of this is going to be blended, worked over, and manipulated later. Play with the various brush strokes and layering the pigment marker over itself. I'm intentionally concentrating the colour in some areas and leaving other parts of the canvas untouched. If you're unfamiliar with watercolours, one of the first rules is that once you've painted your negative space, you really can't get it back. It's best to give yourself the option to add more later. I don't want to go for a solid block colour in my final artwork, so here I'm going to layer those adjacent similar colours with my sepia. If you do want simple block colours, you can skip this step and just stay with the 3 colours you chose in your colour palette. And it's time to do our first blending. I'm not using still water here, but a diluted alcohol blend you can make at home. Isopropyl alcohol is ideal, but I've mixed my water with methylated spirits at a 30:70 ratio. Dosing up a large flat brush with the solution, you'll find how easy it is to blend and work these colours. Enjoy spending time dissolving and manipulating the colour on the surface, seeing how little solution is really required to get the pigment activated, or dose up the canvas to get the colours really moving. I'm not trying to get an even distribution of colour, rather I'm allowing the strength to pool in some areas and dilute in others. It's always enjoyable seeing the result when it's dry. I'll note again, you can see the colour bleeding under the masking tape where more solution is used. I'm leveraging the tape as a tool to create an interesting organic edge, but where the pigment is drier, we can expect a crisper edge line when the tape's removed. Just be mindful of this if you're also using tape in your work. There are, however, tapes on the market more specifically suited to canvas, like Scotch Blue Painter's masking tape. But in this case, I think it's important that you see what happens if you mix your standard household tape and an alcohol solution. Alcohol will repel the pigment on the surface, and you can control the intensity of this chemical property by adjusting the ratio of your solution with more or less water. This effect can be used to your advantage. Likewise, alcohol can be used to lift up unintentional pigment spills on your canvas. I'll go into that a little more later. Conversely, coarse salt will pull and collect the pigment in place. I'm using crystallized salt flakes because I find the larger the salt crystals, the better. This is a physical property more than a chemical one, and another tool to generate interesting textural variations on your surface. To see the full effect, you'll need to wait for the surface to have fully dried. I keep older brushes handy for gently removing the salt layer. Shifting to a new section of my canvas now and placing my chosen complementary colour. This is essentially a repeat of step 1, placing pigment down in varied levels of intensity and perhaps adding in lighter and darker variants of my colour to get some tonal variation once we're blending. Again, I'm intentionally leaving some areas of the linen exposed, and I'm intensifying the pigment in other areas. And we're blending again, as per the first time. If you want, you can try blending with pure water or with a strong dissolved saltwater blend, which can result in the most beautiful shimmering surface effect. This is a really therapeutic process, so I hope you enjoy leaning into the fluidity of it. Remember that there's no perfection and you can't make mistakes when creating something out of joy and intuition. I decided to stay with the alcohol solution because it was working quite well for me the first time. The first section of our artwork is completely dry now, but a reminder that Albrecht Durer markers aren't like ink or permanent markers. They are watercolour pigments, so the colours can be worked and reworked. I'll demonstrate a little here how that looks. Gentle brush strokes using less solution lets us begin lightly transferring colour between our two sections. Do this as much as you feel comfortable. As I said before, I didn't want my artwork to have strictly block colours and crisp edges, so I do want to achieve a bit of interconnectedness and looseness between these complementary colours. A caution that if you go too strong on the brushstrokes or solution, you're almost certain to muddy those colours. The type of brush you're using here is quite crucial as well. Here I'm using the blade end of the flat brush and it's actually picking up a lot of the colour quite effectively. So just something to keep in mind to play around with those ends and what your different tools on hand can achieve for you. But look at this, I was not kidding when I said that these colours can be reworked over and over. These pigments just have so much strength and malleability. You just keep adding more solution and you can keep pushing them around the page. It's actually really addictive, but a huge part of this practice is knowing when to stop and when to be reserved. So a bit of a challenge that I'm not really sure can be taught. It just needs to be practiced and enjoyed. Technique 7 is a wet colour transfer and overlay. This is quite similar to the previous technique, but in this case, where I had provisioned a particularly strong concentration of colour, I now have the opportunity to transfer it elsewhere on the canvas before it's dried. I actually use this technique a lot in my work without even thinking about it. It often feels a bit like you're sculpting the image by taking material from one section and building it up elsewhere. So here's our long-awaited opportunity to remove that masking tape and have a little look at how things have turned out. So we've got some really lovely crisp edges here where the pigment was very strong and not too diluted, and as I expected, a bit of bleed from the pigment. I do quite like how it's worked in this lower brown area though, how it's created a bit of a double border, and I think I'll work with that. But all in all,
quite happy with how it's turning out so far, and we're just going to keep blending and working over this base layer of our first colours. But this is our base layer complete. Really quite happy with how it's tracking so far. Okay, so lifting colour seepage or spills on the canvas. You want to use alcohol on a brush, aggravate the area a little bit, and then let soak and absorb with a clean tissue or kitchen towel. Don't spend too long on this because you don't want to lift the primer off of the canvas. When we're being playful with products like these, we want to continually take stock of where we're at. So here I'm just pointing out a couple of sections I think are quite successful, and I want to lean into those shapes and forms in pushing this painting forwards. So overall, just casting my eye over the shapes and the colours, and yeah, quite happy with where things are at. But let's keep pushing. Something I adore about the Albrecht Durer range is that between the markers and pencils, we've got matching colours. So I've picked the India Red 192, which is the matching India Red that I used and blended earlier on. I'm just going to sketch some of the dry pigment over some blank sections and a bit of crossover with the marker underneath. And just going to see how the colour explodes when you add water. Because have a look at just how vibrant that pigment is when you activate it. Note that I'm using pure water here, not alcohol. I don't really want to wake up the darker layer of colour underneath. I just want to be layering this new fresh pigment over the top. And my top layer hadn't fully dried, so I took that as an opportunity to start blending those colours together and allow the fluid to do what it does and just mix and blend naturally. Just a little bit of encouragement and guidance from the brush is all that's needed here, but I'd really like to see that dry and have some organic forms to work with. I'm going to repeat the process with the other two colours, but in this instance I might not add water, rather just leave the dry pigment sitting over the top. It's actually quite beautiful that the pencil layered in this way emphasises the texture of the canvas. So we end up with some pretty nice variation in the surface of the painting. In this case, you can start to see really where those colours are beginning to run and blend, and it's going to hopefully make for a very interesting portion of the overall image. Okay, so putting down our feature colour. In this area where the salt had dried, I was actually reminded of a South Australian desert landscape, particularly in wildflower season. Just going to take some cues from there and put down the pigment in an almost impressionist manner. A bit heavier towards the base or the foreground, and a little more reserved towards the back, towards the horizon, so to speak. So this is much more structured and kind of draws your eye into the detail, but I do want to take some pure water and soften those edges a bit with a brush. I could choose to use alcohol here, but I don't want to awaken the brown underneath. I do want our feature colour to stay that vibrant feature colour. So as you can see, I'm just being really gentle with the brush tip and just softening the edges and manipulating the shapes. Again, very intuitive and very soft and light. Just scanning the canvas now for other opportunities for places to put the feature colour. I do want to be quite reserved with it, but I do want it to also show elsewhere in the painting. I was thinking of leaving this circle here just plain linen, but let's go ahead and put the feature colour there. Another technique to transfer your pigment across is to draw the marker directly to a palette where you can mix the different pigments together before you commit them to the page. So this is a really effective and easy way to blend paints as you would straight from a tube. It works in the same way, and even if that pigment dries, you can keep adding water and transferring it later. So still using that flat-ended brush, and I'm just
blocking in the colours and shapes. And I guess I didn't really want to be too literal with this artwork, but again, I'm a sucker for the moon, so I'm kind of drawing in a bit of an abstract moon here. And I think it should work with the rest of the painting. Having a bit of a scan, and I'm quite happy with that. Transferring pigment from the palette first does give you a greater degree of control, I feel, especially if you're a little bit nervous about committing the product straight onto your canvas. So I'll repeat that with a couple of more colours, and I just want to be kind of densifying the intensity of pigment up on the top section and moving around, again, just identifying areas that might benefit from some darker shadow or a greater degree of blending. Okay, even though I committed us to 3 colours earlier, I don't want you to feel afraid to take other colours from your set and put a little bit of them in there for extra depth and complexity. I love when there's a good tension between open spaces in a painting and these finer details that draw your eye in. Don't forget that the markers have this fine tip as well, which are perfect for more precision detail. One of the most obvious techniques to use when we're working with liquids on a flat surface is to harness gravity to manipulate our pigments. So you can see just a little tilt of the page and we've got a really beautiful crisp beading. I'm kind of thinking this is like a cumulonimbus cloud or something a bit kind of dark and moody. Using a paintbrush just to manipulate and control that pigment a little bit is all it takes to tidy up the edges, but look at that. It's really coming together to look like a real landscape. Okay, and a classic technique from watercolours is to raise the pigment off the surface using a dry cloth. That's it. That's the technique. Okay, wanting to push things further at this point, this is a true exercise in control and restraint. I didn't want this painting to look too literal, so I'm using some very loose brush strokes to kind of bring some impressionist values back into the painting and working with the geometries that are already down on the page. Whether that's a mistake, that's for the viewer to decide, but yeah, I really just wanted this to be an opportunity to show you all the different ways that this beautiful pigment and these beautiful products can be manipulated on a canvas. I'm going to continue painting for a little while, just finding those shapes and pushing the geometries quite intuitively. So just enjoy this part. There won't be too much commentary for the next couple minutes.
Right, I'm feeling up to adding some gold leaf to the surface of my painting. So if you've decided to do this too and you haven't used gold leaf before, they typically come in these little transfer sheets. The leaf itself is incredibly delicate, so you'll normally want to use an adhesive like this polymer gloss varnish. There's so many different adhesives you can use actually, that could have its own tutorial. I use the polymer gloss varnish and apply it directly to the canvas with a brush. And then I transfer my gold leaf by flipping open the book and pressing it onto the surface of the canvas. It takes a little bit of practice to get this right, and if you move the gold leaf page too much, you can tear the leaf. So I'm using a near pure, it's like a 23 carat edible grade gold. So it is incredibly delicate. You can get like fake gold leaves that are a little more durable and a bit thicker, but they can tend to tarnish. So keep that in mind when you're buying your gold leaf. Make sure if you don't want them to tarnish, you either buy the real stuff, or if you have opted for an imitation gold, sometimes called Dutch gold, that you promptly seal it with a spray gloss varnish as soon as the adhesive has dried. This prevents the top layer of the foil from oxidization and therefore from tarnishing. I'm using a really soft mop brush just to really lightly press that leaf down onto the adhesive, but being super delicate because, as I said, it's really, really fragile and I don't want it to break too much at this point. Only once you're sure the adhesive has completely dried, you can take a slightly stiffer brush and slowly work over that gold leaf to remove the loose parts. Even though the gold leaf is incredibly fragile, it is possible to save some of those leftovers into a jar, so be mindful that if you've got any large pieces, they can be used for future projects.
And finally, once you're happy with your artwork and it's completely dry, you're ready to seal and protect everything with a gloss varnish. I recommend a spray varnish for an artwork like this, because dragging liquid varnish over the surface might yield some unintended further blending. Being a spray, it's crucial you do this task outdoors or in a well-ventilated space. Follow the directions on the can, as recommended distances, angles, and layers might vary from brand to brand. I am so pleased with how this artwork turned out. I think the colours are sophisticated and beautiful, the details are a gorgeous contrasting mix of crisp and flowing, and it definitely sits well within my decor. I'm hoping your own sense of inspiration and your skill set feel a little renewed, and that you might expand the potential within your own practice by taking on any of these techniques. I've been using the incredible Albrecht Durer range for a few years now, and I'm always inspired when I pick up these gorgeous products. If you did follow along, let me know in the comments or on my or Faber-Castell Australia's Instagram page how you found this tutorial, and definitely tag us if you try any of these beautiful products on canvas. You are very welcome to leave us feedback or drop questions. We're always happy to read and answer them. Thank you so much for watching.